said, I'm Becca Rowland. I'm a founding partner with MIDAS Aviation and with the power behind AviaDev Consult. And we created AviaDev Consult last year to provide expertise to support African aviation. And I've been working in aviation for well over 30 years. And in all that time, I've been analysing demand for air travel. And I've worked with airlines, with an airport, the industry association, as you guys said, I was with IATA for a while, and now for many years as a consultant. So my experience is global, but I've got a particular affection for Africa. And like the guys at AviaDev, what does the African aviation deliver on its potential? So if you want to have a chat about that later, do come and visit us on the stand. We'll be there for a little while after this panel today. AviaDev has been all about improving regional connectivity, and we've been tracking connectivity in Africa between the largest cities in each country over a number of years. And the last time we looked, it showed that fewer than 35% of all the main cities across the continent, the capital cities or the largest city in each country, had direct air services between them. And that was before COVID-19 hit. So, and then many air services have come to a standstill as borders were closed and passengers stopped flying. So as the market recovers, we need to be asking, what does air service development need to look like to be able to achieve the regional connectivity that we hadn't actually achieved beforehand? What does it take to do that in a post-COVID world? I know AviaDev ran a webinar a few weeks ago, and in that they polled the audience and asked if African airlines should be cutting and pasting solutions that we found elsewhere, or whether they should innovate and come up with African solutions. And the response was overwhelmingly the latter. 95% of the poll said African airlines need to innovate, they need to find their own solutions, African solutions for this context. And so what I would like us to explore in this session is, what are those African solutions for route development? What are the uniquely African ways that we can find a way through this? So I'm hoping the session will answer some of those questions. And we've got a great panel today. I spoke to all of them last week, and there's some real insights that they have to contribute. So I'll just introduce them very quickly now, but I'll not do a long introduction so we can move on to the questions and the discussion. First, we've got Nowel Ngala, who's the commercial director for ASKY Airline, based in Lomé in Togo. Good afternoon, Noel. Thanks for joining us. We've got Girma. Good afternoon. We've got Girma Shiferaw, who's manager of business development and equity partner airlines at Ethiopian Airlines. So thanks very much for joining us today, Girma. We have Matome Ramokgobedi, Group Manager, Traffic Development at Airports Company South Africa, and actually sitting outside. You're the one sensible one amongst us. It's not a fake background, is it? It's a lovely day there. So welcome, Matome.
Thank you, Becca.
And fourth, but not last, we've got Mark Dunnachie, who's the head of commercial EMEA and Russia at ATR. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Becca. Hi, guys.
So I'd like to start on the subject of demand. That's fundamental to route development, understanding where the demand comes from. And obviously, we need to recover from the current situation. I've been tracking for OAG since the beginning of this crisis, what the capacity position is. Obviously, it's quite early to understand how many people are flying, but in terms of capacity, we're seeing African aviation running at about 68% below where it was a year ago. It's different in different parts of the continent, so 56% below last year in Eastern Africa, 82% in Southern Africa. So Southern Africa is faring a bit worse in terms of how much flying is happening. Perhaps I could start with you, Noel. As an airline, how are you going about getting routes operational again? How do you know if there's a demand? Is there a sort of suck it and see approach, or do you have indicators that you're looking at to help you know where to start up again?
Thank you very much, Becca. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank AviaDev for organizing this. It's very important as we continue to create awareness across the board, especially regarding the African aviation industry. Straight to your question regarding, first of all, let me mention we're based in Togo. ASKY is a privately owned airline based in Togo. And as we speak, the airspace of Togo is still closed, and so we are still not yet operating. So our aircrafts are still on ground. However, across the region, we've seen some countries already being open. A few countries, I think about 5 or 6 of them, are already opened for operations, with many of them postponing and doing preparations, hoping for activities to open up early August. So we hope that by 1st of August, we should see a lot of these markets really open so that it can help our connectivity, because we are basically a network carrier and we rely on a lot of connectivities from markets. We don't do point to point, and we need this connectivity. So straight to your questions regarding recovery from the current crisis, we are still in it, and it's a gradual process. The demand and the traffic levels are still very, very extremely low, in fact, non-existent. And until we start by putting the importance, especially governments and authorities, focusing on the aviation sector to raise it up and see it as an economic catalyst to be able to support this growth which is needed. If this emphasis is not really laid on this aspect to really support the aviation industry to pick up, then it's going to take a very long time, and it's going to push further. The delay is going to push further into next year. So we have very low traffic now, and basically non-existent. Apart from that, which is directly linked to the next point, which is on the control methods put in place by the various airports. When you look at the procedures and you look at the communications, which they have all communicated, the few ones that have started and the ones that are preparing to start, we see huge variations in terms of the procedures and what has been imposed, be it in terms of the control processes and all of that. And our concern is we would rather like to see a kind of uniform, given that Africa has a lot of regional blocks, like you have the ECOWAS, the South African Development Community, the Central African Development Community. I mean, if we can see a kind of uniform procedure in which we're traveling across the region, can have a kind of uniformity in terms of the controls. Control done in Dakar is also valid and respected in the other markets, so that traffic can flow, and this can only really come in with the support of these regional blocks and heads of states that can jointly put this into place, because the discrepancy and the variations from the various authorities and countries are too many. What is being done in one country is completely different from what is happening in the other country, and so it's a little bit scary in terms of traffic growth, because this is not going to support growth, and this is going to seriously discourage passengers because of all the hassle. I mean, come to think of it, traveling now and thinking of going through all the steps and the processes with the risk of contamination can only discourage. And when you get to a point where the passengers are fully discouraged and that they don't feel like traveling, then there's no traffic, then there's no load factors, and then airlines cannot also fly, because airlines won't be able to position aircraft in a situation where they won't be able to cover their operating costs. So it's something that really has to be considered. And on the next part of the question on how we understand demand, basically, demand falls on 4 major categories when we're looking at route development. You look at the route itself, you look at demand, is there demand on the route, you look at the volume and at the existing competition. On the route itself, you want to understand, you want to make sure that the route actually exists. And when you look at your network structure and your fleet choice, which you want to use for that route, including your business model, the routing which you're choosing has to fit into your business model, into the aircraft type you want to use. The route has to have reasonable yields. It also has to have the required passengers and the cargo capacity. So these are the elements you want to make sure you look at in the combined form before attempting to start the route. On demand, you want to consider the characteristics of demand, and the purpose is to identify where the type of traveling or the type of passengers that are available on that routing. So in this current situation where we have very low demand, we'll mostly find passengers that will be traveling strictly for business. That is corporates and governments, absolute need to travel. Most leisure and family visits and all of that you won't find most of this traffic, because people want to make sure that everything is really in place before. So traveling is going to be really absolute for business reasons. And also the volumes in terms of the passenger availability and the cargo availability based on the city pairs. And this brings you to the pricing. Your pricing on that route, you want to make sure that you have the right price to be able to attract volume. But now with the situation of COVID and what everybody has gone through, be it at the level of the operations at the airports and the aircraft, pricing is going to be very central in terms of airlines managing their revenue management and building capacity. And then on the last point on how you want to understand the demand is on the competition. You want to see the kind of competition that exists in the route to be able to position yourself. And this is the right time where airlines are not supposed to be fighting on any of the elements regarding pricing, regarding anything. We have to use this opportunity to build partnerships. In order to be able to deploy to the market complementary services in which there's a complete service availability throughout the day or throughout the week or throughout the month based on the various airlines that are existing, rather than fighting, because the volumes are very little and a lot of airlines are already been highly heated. So that's in a nutshell the beginning of my comment.
Thank you very much. That's helpful, and it sounds like much of that is the same as we would expect of route development in normal times. The bit that feels really different and tricky at the moment is over decades we've got a streamlined system of airline operations where everyone knows what happens, and now we've suddenly got layered on top of that all these different rules in different countries that will require things of passengers that mean that regional connectivity becomes really difficult. A passenger connecting through somewhere, are the rules the same for the journey to the connecting to the hub airport, and then are they different moving on from that? So we've got a sort of a layer of complexity that really needs to be sorted out quite quickly, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Correct. That's correct. Especially moving in a situation where we don't have the data. Normally, in a regular situation, you would have data to be able to look at your predictions, to be able to see the potential of the route, to be able to. But with the current pandemic situation where everything is more or less blank, we can only do some kind of predictions based on bookings, based on advanced bookings, which is good for airports to open early and quick enough for airlines to communicate and see advanced bookings, and then to be able to know how to manage demand versus supply, positioning the right aircraft type and size to be able to maximize revenue and minimize operating costs.
And tell me, do you see when demand eventually comes back, do you see yourselves going back to the historical data about demand and about traffic as a sort of baseline, or will you be starting again? Will traffic come back? I mean, in as much as you have any sense now of what will happen, do you expect traffic to come back in quite a different way, or so you'll be looking for new indicators, or will traffic come back, demand will come back in a similar way to where it was before?
Yes, if you look at the scenario where you maintain the same city pairs and you have low demand, then the load factors now are quite very low.
Yes, obviously.
Yes, and if with the same network or the same city pairs, you're able to build up load factors after a certain period to attain a certain level of load factor, then you can rely on previous data on that same city pair as an indication that there's growth has taken place. But in a situation where you need to carve out new routings as a result of trying to connect the right city pairs, get the right partnership, use the right aircraft when there is a change because there's absolutely going to be a revamp of your network to be able to adapt to the markets that have potentials now based on passenger and cargo, then you will not be able to rely on previous data. You have to look forward.
I'd like to bring Matome in now. So at AXA, you're well known for the work you've done in places like with the Cape Town Air Access, that sort of working with a group of stakeholders, with partners to look at route development. Is that a model that is absolutely as relevant now as ever? Nowel just now was saying we need to be thinking in terms of partnerships. We need to be thinking what other people are doing in this space so we can all survive. Is that a core belief for where you're sitting in South Africa now?
Okay, thank you, Becca, and hello everyone. Matome Ramokgobedi. I work for airports in South Africa. We operate 9 airports in South Africa. And to Becca's questions, the model of partnership, we believe it works. And obviously, we encourage also benchmarking with other regions if there is any good practices that we can bring into our shows. So indeed, going forward, we see more partnership, and we encourage also the authorities within respective local governments to join forces to develop routes further to connect our country first, also the Southern Africa region and the region of Sub-Saharan Africa at large.
When we spoke last week, Matome, to the point Nowel made about government involvement and the way they need to see the industry, you were saying that you wish that governments saw airline activity and route development a bit more like foreign direct investment. Do you want to say a bit about that? Because I thought that was a really interesting point and a different lens with which to see route development.
Absolutely, Becca. So if you look at aviation, it's really a catalyst for economic development. It facilitates cultural and social exchanges. And today, global cities are within a reach, is either same day or the next day. And therefore, I am of the view that it is important that the same lens that our respective regions, countries use when they look at foreign direct investment into the country, into the city, they also apply the same lens to airlines, because there are actually investors, and obviously Mark can attest to that. The amount of money that airlines spend buying aircraft. There are investors, yes, because they set up small bases at destinations, but they put significant amount of investment to really make the route work. So I think going forward, airlines should be given same priorities as traditional investors, because they are investors. So they promote our destinations, they create local jobs, they support jobs along the travel value chain. And cities, countries, provinces, regions offer incentives to traditional investors when they come to our regions, their countries. So why can't same investment or apply to airlines? Because they also play the same role as a brick and mortar investor that will come to our shores. So we think it is important going forward to really really look at the way airlines, instead of just saying they are a burden to fiscals, they are not profitable, but the role that they play, it is actually unmatched. If you were to look at the relatively small amount of cargo air travel pushes, but the value that they push, because most of those cargoes, it's time sensitive. It's also need to get to destination same day or the next day. So I think our governments across the continent of Africa, we should also apply the same incentive framework that we really provide to multinationals coming to our shores to invest, because as we speak now, there are no international activities into our respective countries. So there are people that are employed by those international or foreign airlines They are now, obviously, some of them have been furloughed, and some they have salary cut. And the stories goes on people that are impacted by this pandemic. I think it is important that we start viewing air travel as an investment into a destination, because the country doesn't even have to ask for an airline to promote them. An airline invests significant amount of money to promote the destination, but also trying to make the route work. So indeed, I think we should really look at how airlines are supported, and they also deserve actually a significant part of the dinner table.
It's really interesting. I was hoping we'd move on to the government discussion towards the end, because I'm sure we could use up our full time discussing the role of governments. But does anybody on the panel want to comment on what Matome said? You're nodding away, Mark. I don't know if you've got a comment.
Becca, great to be here, but totally agree with what you've said, Matome. You know, the importance of regional connectivity, bringing investment into local communities, is evident. You know, we've seen this before when you took it out of the equation when we had the volcanic incident in Europe. Everything shut down and it was a disaster. This is 10 times worse. So totally support what you were saying. Just to add some stats to share with our colleagues on the panel here, and I see a lot of really interesting comments coming through on the chat room as well. You know, we're at the moment about 69% of the ATR global network has been restored, and that's a real positive. I mean, we've all been deeply impacted by this crisis, no question. Some of us are still in lockdown, others are coming out of it. We think that regional connectivity will be key in coming back on the agenda post this crisis. So endorse what Noel was saying as well, but that was just my quick add-in, Becca.
Yeah, thanks very much. Girma, perhaps we could bring you in now, because in some ways Ethiopian has done, you know, a huge amount to assist regional connectivity, I would say. From your perspective, I was thinking, we were talking last week about the need for carriers like Ethiopian to connect with other regional, smaller airlines. How do you see regional connectivity? What's your perspective as, you know, somebody who's managing the partnerships at Ethiopian?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you hear me loud and clear. The internet connection is not that reliable, as you know.
We can hear you.
It's okay, the voice is... Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm happy. I'm glad. Okay, coming back to your question, this network of feeder airlines has a necessity to have them all over Africa through partnership. It's very essential in the route development portfolio of any airline that wants to have its depths and reach in Africa. Number one, the reason is our continent is very much underserved. Still in the 21st century, we know the kind of network serving the continent, operators, etc. Still 80% of
Is it just me who is Girma's video? Oh, you're there.
Okay. So it means that the continent is not really still served by the standards of, global aviation. So looking into the landmass of our continent, the population size, the growing move of population to cities, etc., and the growing economy, Africa needs these small feeder airlines all over the continent through partnership. As you have mentioned it earlier, it's not easy to start up an airline all the time. Maybe it is easier somewhere Somewhere it is difficult, somewhere there is a willingness and support. But, you know, airlines like Ethiopian have been championing the creation of these regional airlines for a long time, for more than 10 years, as far as I remember. And it took time, but it's now materializing. But does it mean, is it enough? No, not at all. We want everybody to take a lesson of this and push this so that Africa is well served, because air transport is developed, the catalyst for economic, political, and social development. So there are forms of partnership modalities. You know, we cannot subscribe our model to another operator in another region. It depends. It depends on the kind of understanding and the level of commitment between the partners. But there are so many modalities. You know, governments can chip in into the picture. Private entrepreneurs can chip in into the picture. It might even be a tripartite kind of partnership where there is a little bit of government and a little bit of private investors or interest groups, etc. So there are so many modalities to the partnership. There is no one and only one approach to forming partnership in the expansion of regional airlines in Africa. It's doable. You know, it's doable. The one thing that we all need is to have the commitment and the will, and the belief that Africa needs more and more players on the ground, because it's a huge, large continent, unserved demand, huge demand, and a lot of population and a big market. You know, what's the driver? It's always the interplay of demand and supply. See the rest of the world, over-congested, a lot of competition, cutthroat competition, what have you. Come to Africa, the concept of LCC is not even yet well ingrained in the continent. So there is a lot of ways to develop routes, aviation, airline routes in Africa. Is it a cash and carry approach, a quick win? I don't think so. It takes time. It takes time. It takes patience, but the reward will come definitely.
It's really interesting. I know when I've led an air service development workshops in Africa, and you know, we've had airports sat around the room, and you can go through all the things that Nowel spoke about earlier, you know, as being the fundamentals of air service development and route development. And then it sometimes seems like it's inevitable that the answer is they need a 787. And you know, what you're speaking to there, Girma, is something quite different. It's about small airlines serving, you know, regional markets, actually quite thin markets quite often, and yet you're saying that the continent's underserved. Mark, can I bring you in here as somebody who's in a business that's not selling large aircraft, but you obviously have something to say to this, that there's a need to right size the aircraft type, isn't there, for the sort of markets we're looking to develop. To achieve that regional connectivity, we actually need to have the right size of aircraft to match up that supply demand that Girma's just spoken about.
Absolutely, Becca. I mean, what we've noticed as well is at least in terms of the ATR, a lot of our operators have found the adaptability and flexibility of the platform. You know, I was talking to some industry colleagues last week, and it's quite interesting when you see, you know, post-COVID and pre-COVID, how the landscape is very different. You know, in the European context, we're a little bit ahead of the curve now, and we've come out of lockdown in many jurisdictions. In Africa, there's still a considerable lockdown, but the turn will come to exit. And when you exit, you know, the comment made to someone recently was the bigger you are, the harder you fall. And to have a parked fleet of wide bodies and narrow bodies, as the gentleman on the panel will probably agree, is a hugely expensive issue. We had 40% of the ATR fleet still flying at the peak of the pandemic. And that was because we had a platform that quickly adapted to putting cargo on board. And I saw Chrissy's comments about cargo and some of the others. Absolutely agree. You need a platform that is flexible and quick to adapt. So post-COVID, I'm intrigued to see how we'll go down the route on SATAM. No doubt that discussion will pop up again. I'm on public record at conferences as saying, we need to walk before we run. But I think hopefully it'll bring some sanity to the market. Comments by Girma on the need to cooperate and work together. Totally endorse that. I would really encourage some of the airlines to try and work together to seize this opportunity. And from Matome, we've talked in the past a little about our routes model. Becca, you know it. I have to make a plug for it here, but
make a plug for
we will have it adapted for the COVID environment, but we see plenty of opportunities. And my last point to share, I love showing examples, and if you consider a forest fire, we've all seen them, and it's devastating. Everything is gone. And within a couple of weeks, you see some green shoots. And then within a few months, a few plants. And then 2 years later, you wouldn't even know there'd been a forest fire. So we're realistic. This is a hugely distressing situation for all of us. Manufacturers, airlines, airports, lessors, everyone in the curve, hotels, you name it. But we'll come out of this crisis. The landscape will certainly be different. That's for sure.
I'd just like to go back to what Girma said. You made a comment, Girma, talking about LCCs, I think, in Europe, and you obviously said you think there's a lot of potential demand in Africa, but we haven't seen that LCC model work in Africa. And is that because it's that fundamental, it's the wrong sort of aircraft type? Typically the LCCs use a couple of type, in Europe and America use different type, a specific type of aircraft. Should they be looking at smaller aircraft, and then we might see some new airlines emerge? Are we, I was asking on the in the booth earlier today, and we had quite a number of people there. In some ways, this is an opportunity for new airlines to emerge. Are we expecting to see that? We have, availability of aircraft, potentially availability of human resources. We've got lower fuel prices than we've seen for a long time. Might this environment create the sort of airlines that we need on the ground to achieve this sort of regional connectivity? Would any of you like to step in and hazard a guess there? Perhaps Nowel?
Okay. Yeah, regarding low-cost carriers, the low-cost carrier model has been very, very difficult to be implemented across Africa. That has been tested over and over. And the few ones that have successfully been done some operation is around the Southern African region, Southern and Eastern African region. Across the rest of the regions in Africa, it's been very tough. Reasons because of the infrastructure first. Low-cost carriers have a particular
they have to have low cost
model. Yeah, they have a very particular model which is strictly cost driven, and they operate if you look at across Europe and America, they operate around secondary airports. First of all, in Africa, these secondary airports don't exist because secondary airports help low-cost carriers to minimize cost. Secondly, in terms of sales and marketing, in Africa, we still mostly use the traditional means of travel agencies that do sales over 80%, and then they collect commissions. With low-cost carriers, they mostly you'd have to do ticket purchasing and communication and all of that marketing using websites online to minimize your costs, especially GDS costs, because in Africa, after fuel, you have GDS costs, which is really, really high. So these are the areas, amongst others, fuel and all other elements that are affecting the successful operations of low-cost carriers in Africa. So it is a very, very difficult model to implement in Africa. That is why when you look at the models, every other airline that comes into existence, maybe from charter service and later on moved into commercial, or from low cost, it all boils down to regional carriers. And these regional carriers are an adaptive model that exists based on the heterogeneous nature of the African markets and the disparities and all the complications. But at the end of the day, like Mr. Girma was mentioning, it is very important for these regional carriers, or if you like, low-cost carriers, to exist. 66% 66% of African cities are not connected.
Yeah.
We're still far, far, far below. If you look at the situation before, the regional carrier that was existing before Air Afrique from 1962 right up to 2002, especially within West and Central Africa, right up to when ASKY came into picture in 2010. From 2002 to 2010, if you had to travel from one West or Central African region to another, you had to fly to Paris and then come back in the morning flight. So we see that if you want, today, if you still want to leave from East Africa coming across to Central Africa, you must make a stop either in Nairobi or in Addis Ababa or Kigali. So these are the kind of things we need to eliminate, because the potential is there, the market is there, the population is there.
It sounds though to me that it's this sort of impossible tangle, though, that on the one hand,
chip in some more points on this very interesting one.
Girma, go ahead. Yes.
Yes, I think most of but there is also foreign currency. You know, to start up an airline, almost all costs involve foreign currency. So in Africa, one of the major issue of having these regional operators in the low cost, definitely in the low cost model, is the issue of foreign currency. Almost all African countries, I could say, are always short of foreign currency. The other issue is that of traffic rights. You know, despite what we say about what we have been talking about, Yamoussoukro, single African air transport market, what have you, we have always beautiful sounding initiatives, but when we try to put it on ground, it has never been easy. Leave alone for new startup regional airline, whatever, whether it's low cost or not, even for the established mainline operators like Ethiopian, Kenya, etc., South Africa, the issue of traffic right has been always a big issue. So, you know, the environment is not really conducive, but does it mean somebody should not start somewhere? No, we have to start it. You know, it's a big continent, a big market, big potential, fastest economic growth. COVID is a phenomenon, you know, like 9/11, COVID is another phenomenon. 9/11, everybody, I think the opinion was air travel is going to slow down, etc. Did 9/11 kill air travel? No. You know, there was remedial measures, detectors, screening devices, etc., etc. All kinds of gadgets were invented. Aviation was transformed into a safer, more secure mode of transport. Same thing like COVID now. You know, post-COVID, we'll have more safer, more hygienic, more convenient form of transport, and aviation will continue to boom. Travel will not go away. So Africa will be also part of that drive. The market will be there, much bigger than what we are talking now. Somebody has to jump in. So with the right size of aircraft, as mentioned earlier, with all these challenges, we encourage more and more operators to come to the scene. These difficulties are there, but you know, through different mechanisms, joint partnership, etc., and sometimes pulling the government inside the game, will overcome it. Things are getting better. Liberalization is slow, but will come. Will be there. So in a way, it's a challenge, but it should not be discouraging for new startups. We all welcome them to join the air transport, you know, operation in Africa, because it is rewarding. One error being done time and again is, you know, everyone tries to jump in big, you know, with big jet, long haul operation, etc. All this overambition startup. This we have to be careful. You know, it's better to start with, there are fitting aircrafts, turboprops, ATR, Q400, what have you, depends on the budget and the fleet planning of the airline, but we have good turboprop aircrafts. Our advice is to start small and expand gradually. As long as these things are done properly, there is enough market for everybody. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you. So we've got a few minutes left. I want to bring the conversation back to that question of government. Feedback here. What do we need from governments at this time? We've also had a bit of a discussion already about maybe seeing their service development a bit more like foreign investment, seeing the economic impact that it brings to a community, to a region, to a country, rather than seeing it as a sort of income in hard-pressed times for government. And there's obviously a bunch of other things that you might be looking for governments. That Africa, aviation is quite expensive, expensive infrastructure costs. There's expenses, all sorts of costs for doing setting up business in Africa. What are you most looking for from government in this time? And if there was a sort of a reset moment, what would you be looking for?
Becca, I'm just reading some of the comments, and poor Matome and birds behind his head.
Was it birds? I've muted Matome from here, and that seemed to help. I was trying to work out where the noise is coming from. Birds, is it, Matome? There has to be a downside from sitting in that beautiful environment.
Just he's looking far too relaxed and comfortable there, I have to say. So, Luke, just a very quick comment from our side, from ATR. I'm sure the gentleman will speak much better directly to their own governments, but if I can share at least what we're seeing on other continents as well, some of the money that's coming in, and the answer is simple, Becca. Governments need to give money. Let's not be beating around the bush here. It's a clear message. The airlines need support, and that's starting to happen in several quarters. What we find interesting, at least in the European context, some of that money has been made conditional upon certain circumstances, and one of them is sustainability, which will not surprise you that I raise it as an issue because it's close to our heart. But I pass over to my colleagues who are much more expert on the African airline situation in terms of comments on that.
So what Mark's referring to is the likes of the support for Air France has been conditional on reducing their domestic network. There was a bit of strange ruling in Austria about no fares being below a certain level, and so on. So trying to tie some of the support to a move towards making aviation a bit greener, I guess. But is that something that you see as being relevant? Is that an issue that people are concerned at in your context, the rest of the panel?
Okay, Becca, I think what is required from respective government is the platform first, and also platform and be open to be educated on the value the industry generates, and then from there, obviously, we will leave it up to them to decide whether indeed there is value in supporting aviation at large. So just a platform, and also be open to for experts to educate them, and also to quantify the value and the potential value of any other opportunities.
I know Mark's been vocal about SATAM, but while we're still waiting for that to happen, is in other parts of the world we've talked about opening up travel corridors, travel bubbles, whatever the sort of sexy term is for them. But is that what we need as well in Africa? We need countries on a bilateral or a regional basis to say, actually, we're open to business and work in small groupings and work out, rather than going for the big shot, whole of Africa sort of SATAM approach. In the short term, we just need people to get on and allow travel to happen between countries.
Yeah, yes, of course. I think on my side, I think little drops actually make up the cup. So if you take for an example something like visas, which people need to travel with, a country like Benin has totally opened up for all Africans. You don't need a visa to come into the country. These are the kind of steps that we don't need to wait for the bigger picture and for everybody to implement. Once a government understands the importance of what it's doing and can implement that, then the others will follow, because the others are going to see. Gradually, the others are implementing visas upon arrival, and also the cost and changing on cost, and also visa-free. So it's not about the bigger picture, because the bigger picture of waiting for SATAM is going to take a very long time. Today, we've been talking for SATAM now for a number of years after Yamoussoukro declaration, but unfortunately, we still have just 35 countries, 35, that have actually signed for it. And it's still taking its time. And we on its implementation, we're still not sure, because we still have a lot of countries that are still resisting and still relying on their sovereignty and bringing up the whole point on their sovereignty, like in the Yamoussoukro declaration. So there's still a lot of work that has to be done to actually expatiate on the liberalization importance in Africa, which is going to help to grow and develop the economy. The governments have a very, very important role to play. I keep on saying it. And back to basics, from these organizing such discussions, we need to absolutely have government officials in this panel. We need to see civil aviation directors. We need to see transport ministers, ministers of finance, the directors at transport ministries, to hear what exactly they are saying. Because in Africa, most of the aviation decisions are made by politicians and the public sector, not involving the private sector and the civil society or aviation practitioners. And this is where the gap is. Why the private sector and the civil society discuss about aviation and bring out the truth about it, the decision makers at the public sector, they are completely alone. Most of the airline companies and airports are attached to the transport ministry, but the finance ministry is part of it and operates alone. So these are these discrepancies that the government, most of these discussions now should focus on these government officials to really get involved and also make sure in policy and procedure developments, they should absolutely involve aviation practitioners to be able to move aviation in Africa one step forward.
Thank you very much, Nowel. I think your eyes giving us an indication that we're coming to the end. That's a great end point. So maybe the next event will be one where we need to get all those guys in the room and have the conversation with them, don't we? Thank you all very much, Matome, Nowel, Girma. I appreciate your time today and your contribution and your insights. Thanks very much. You're right.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I think very inspirational message from Nowel to finish with today's session. Thank you, Becca, for moderating it. Thank you, Matome. Thank you, Nowel. Thank you, Girma. Thank you, Mark, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone in the audience, in the chat. There was a very lively discussion going on there. I saw some couple of very interesting comments. There also a idea for a Cuckoo Airlines. So I think that has to work on potentially for.
Matome, I have the aircraft for you.
Yeah.
Say.
I said I have the aircraft for Matome. Airline.
Yes.
Same as for other sessions.
Private video.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
So definitely, please, if you still have some time, please join us in the AviaDev Consult booth. Becca will be there, or Gaga will be there. Matome and Mark can virtually sign an aircraft deal over there. So definitely use the opportunity and chat to our AviaDev colleagues.
Thank you, everyone.
And same as the other sessions, also this one was recorded and we will share it on our YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe to AviaDev YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to AviaDev Inside Africa podcast, the only podcast dedicated to African aviation. We've done over 120 episodes. And most importantly, follow us on LinkedIn. So AviaDev Africa on LinkedIn. We share everything that all new events, all papers we are working on together with AviaDev Consult. So please touch with us as we work together to make African aviation better for the future. So thank you everyone, and have a still lovely afternoon. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Everyone.